You are more real than I know. Help me remember that I'm not alone. And your word is life to my soul. Help me remember that you're in control. 'Cause when you speak, I feel my heart burn within. Teach my soul to be always listening. And your word is a light to my path. Help me remember you're the first and last. And you are the beautiful one. Whenever I see you, I am overcome. And you are never ending in your ways. I could search out your heart for all my days. And Lord, I need you in my life. And nothing else can satisfy. Now that I know I was made for this discovery. Now that I know I was made for this discovery. This discovery. This discovery. This discovery. This discovery.
I don't know, security. There are no thieves and thugs out here. We're members of Congress.
With
We're parents,
identification.
we're teachers.
Each of us.
There's our ID, right there.
We were elected.
This is our job.
This is our job. We're doing our job.
Oh, wow.
You're securing this building against who?
Members of Congress.
Excuse me?
Are you prepared to stand here all night if we decide to stay?
I guess, yeah.
All right, well, you just stay right there then. And you just stay and stand.
Why aren't you letting us go to that desk like we were able to do last year?
He's not a U.S. employee.
This is a public institution. Did Elon Musk hire you?
But
you work for?
Who do you work for?
Are you not aware of?
Are you even
Who do you work for?
I'm a federal employee working for the education.
We trying to.
There's a sign back there that says Doge actually means dangerous oligarchs grab everything. Well, ain't that the truth? I am so tired of these billionaire boys and their grubby little hands grabbing at everything. Hands off our bodies. Hands off our data. Hands off our tax refunds. Hands off our social security checks. Hands off our competition. Hands off our democracy. Hands off.
We will introduce the Stop the Steal Act in short order to prevent unlawful access with respect to the Department of Treasury's payment system connected to people who are trying to steal personal, sensitive, and confidential information related to Social Security recipients, Medicare recipients, taxpayers, businesses, non-for-profits, veterans, and everyday Americans. It's unacceptable, unconscionable, and un-American. Stop the Steal Act will prevent this unlawful access from taking place.
Stop what you're doing. President Trump broke the law and shut down a huge chunk of government funding. That means little kids in preschool may stop getting their school lunches. Meals on Wheels, the folks bringing hot food to seniors could grind to a halt. Nursing homes funded by Medicaid don't know how to pay their workers. Whether you live in a red state or a blue state, this is a lot of pain on a lot of people. And that is just the start. If you're working to cure cancer, your funding was just paused. If you run a homeless shelter, your budget now has a big hole in it. How do you feed people? If you work at a veterans nonprofit, you're scrambling to get answers. Donald Trump promised to bring down the cost of living for working people on day one. Well, here we are at the start of week 2, and he's ripping away the programs that help people breathe a little easier. We gotta fight back.
You wanna know why we'll never have another Black Wall Street?
Obama ain't never put no money in my pockets, nigga. Kamala ain't never put no money in my pockets, nigga. Trump put money in my pockets, nigga.
So now it's Soldier Boy, doubling down on the ignorance. I had a discussion with somebody a few days ago about why we won't ever have another Black Wall Street. Somebody said, we got to come together. And I'm like, this is why we won't be able to come together. This is why we won't ever have another Black Wall Street. Our ancestors was built different. They had a common goal and they stayed on that path. And Black Wall Street existed because enough of us said, okay, let's do this, this, this together. So these cats, now he literally said it. Obama ain't do nothing for him. Kamala Harris ain't do nothing for him. This racist dude did something for him. It don't matter what the racist dude is doing against the other people that look like him. He could care less about that because he got paid. He know that racist did something for him. This is why it's going to be hard to unify. This is why it's going to be an uphill battle for us as a culture to say, okay, enough with the bullshit. And I'm not talking about these people having to carry the revolution. That's not what this is, because it takes a village to do this. I'm talking about you not standing for anything. You being able to be bought. That's why revolutions won't happen the same way. This is about you falling for anything because you don't stand for shit.
Democrats are always ready, willing, and able to driving down the high cost of living. We understand that America is too expensive. There are far too many hardworking American taxpayers struggling to live paycheck to paycheck. Housing costs are too high. Grocery costs are too high. Child care costs are too high. Insurance costs are too high. Utility costs are too high. America is too expensive. Democrats are committed to driving down the high cost of living.
I want you to know that it really honors me to stand before you today, and I'm very humbled to do so. I consider this a great privilege to serve as your new HUD secretary. We have a housing crisis, a housing affordability crisis. We have a homelessness issue. We have disaster recovery. There's a lot of things we've got to deal with this agency, and we will. But I want to challenge everyone in this room and everyone that is watching. We will not just think of these things as crises, but instead opportunities to make a difference in the lives of so many people across this country, an opportunity to lift people up, to lift families up, to lead them to a path of self-sufficiency, an opportunity to impact and to enact impactful, enduring policies that build on the president's Day 1 executive order to reduce housing costs in our country.
Elon Musk is a Nazi nepo baby. A godless, lawless billionaire. You know what elected Elon? This is the American people. This is not your trashy Cybertruck that you can just
you're not really into politics. Okay, it's fair enough. But what are you into? Transformers? Pokemon? You child? Sorry, but no, but this election affects you in ways you couldn't possibly imagine, but also in quite a few ways that even your pot-addled teenage brain can manage. Yeah, soaring youth unemployment in a job market saturated with unpaid internships, filled with jammy little who have daddy helping with the rent. Tuition fees have tripled, no help with housing if you're under 21, huge cuts to youth services and youth mental health services. Brilliant.
Hello, and hopefully everybody can hear me. Welcome to another episode of Cutting Through the Culture. And tonight I'm flying solo. So if you all were expecting to see four of us up here, surprise, surprise, it's just me. And I guess it's kind of fitting since I had to miss last week. I know Quisha, Blanche, and Chuck were still present, and we had a special guest, Mr. Jericho Green. It's always really nice to have him on. I think he adds seamlessly to the show. And so tonight, I just wanted to get into some of the things that have been happening as of late as it pertains to American politics. Specifically, when it comes to what seems to be this overhaul that the Trump presidency, that the Trump administration is undergoing as it relates to the federal government. And it's interesting to watch. My guess is that he's moving as fastly as he's moving because he understands that this is his last term. And he wants to make good on a lot of the promises that was made on the campaign trail, in addition to the slogan last time around, to drain the swamp. There wasn't a lot of swamp draining during the first Trump administration, and there seems to be some of that going on this time around. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of it as a historian. I still have this kind of wait and see kind of posture. Do I believe that Trump is an ideological, philosophical, conservative, or Christian? I don't. However, I do think that he is a populist to some degree, and the flavor of populism circa 2020 to 2025 is one that has a bit of a conservative tinge to it when it comes to securing the border, when it comes to bringing manufacturing back to the United States, when it comes to a whole number of things. It seems to be that there is a bit of a conservative tinge to it. My take on Trump, and I wrote an article on this. It was published with The Blaze a few months ago. My take on Trump when it comes to this notion that he is kind of a conservative superhero in our times is predicated mostly on a schism that took place between Trump and Obama back in 2011, I think it was. Was it 2011? 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, when it came to the so-called Affordable Care Act, which was then known as Obamacare, or at least that's what it was. That's what it was slandered as. Now folks are back to calling it the Affordable Care Act. But when it came to the Affordable Care Act, there was some language in that legislation, in that piece of legislation, which required those who did not get health insurance by a certain date to be fined by the government. And there was some additional language in there that said members of Congress were exempt from that particular penalty. And Trump took issue with that language. He asked, naturally, why is it that Congress is exempt from that penalty? Meanwhile, you're superimposing yourself on the American people, forcing them to get something that they might not want to get. And so this created a kind of back and forth between Obama and Trump. And as we all know, during that correspondence dinner, Barack Obama, along with the comedian, who I forget who that comedian was that night, saw it fit to roast Donald Trump. And many people say that that was the night that Trump decided that he was going to run for president. And my opinion, whenever Trump threw his hat in the ring in 2016, was that the only reason he was running for as a Republican was because it was the opposing party of the party that Barack Obama happened to own to, who was Donald Donald Trump's what am I trying to say? My opinion, let me start all over again, because my mouth is moving faster than my brain. My opinion back in 2016 or 2015, whenever Trump decided to throw his hat in the ring for president, was that Donald Trump is running as a Republican because his adversary, Barack Obama, just so happened to belong to the Democrat Party. Because as you remember, Donald Trump has been a long-time Democrat. He never really gave us any kind of explanation as it pertains to his becoming a conservative, how he transitioned from being a Democrat to all of a sudden being a Republican. That story never came to light, unless you all know something I don't know or seen something that I haven't seen. I think the reason why many of us did not really think to ask the question of, well, you know, how did you become a Republican? How did you become a conservative? The reason none of us thought to ask the question is because many of us believe that as a person gets older, they become more conservative. And so I think most of us just kind of chopped it up to that, when the reality of it is that has proven not to be the case in many people's situation. I mean, take a look at Nancy Pelosi, who's all of 100 years old. She's not really 100 years old, but you feel my drift. Chuck Schumer, he's old as dirt. Bernie Sanders, he's been saying the same things since the 1970s, and he's a socialist, a communist, I would argue, which really there's no difference. But and not just members of Congress. There's a lot of older people I know personally who are just as radical today in their 70s as they were in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so I think that it is not okay to make the generalization that people get more conservative as they get older. They might get more conservative as it pertains to their own individual anecdotal life. Because, I mean, naturally, when you're young and impressionable and you are hearing some radical politician or activist on your television screen and you've never have experienced life, you don't know what it's like to have to pay your own bills, to have to pay a mortgage, to have to take care of children, to have to really be a man or be a woman. You're living under your parents' roof. It's easy for you to gravitate toward radical ideology, radical rhetoric. And then whenever you get your first paycheck and you see FICA and you see all the taxes being taken out, many people stiffen up and they become conservative, at least as it pertains to their own individual life. But when it comes to the broader world, they might still hold to a liberal or Marxist worldview. And that's what tonight's conversation is about. Those videos, those clips in that montage may seem to be kind of random and all over the place, but there's a thematic thing going on. There's a thematic kind of common denominator that we see happening in those clips that maybe some of y'all caught on to, maybe some of y'all didn't. But we're going to talk about it this evening. And that is that we are in a historical moment. It might not realize that you might not realize how historical of a moment that we find ourselves in right now, but we are in fact in a historical moment. It's easy to look at events that happened in the past as historical moments, and really that's because of the narratives that come out of the past, right? The controlled narratives, I should say, that come out of the past. Events that happened or that transpired in the past are similar to the events that are transpiring today. Events that I would argue were pivotal moments in American and world history are similarly happening today. The reason why it's difficult to see it as such is because the narratives and of those events that we learn about was perpetrated and conveyed in a very controlled way. It used to be newspapers, and newspapers were meant for pushing propaganda, meant for pushing a narrative that people bought into because it's a written text, right? Of course it's true. And then later came the radio, and the government, the federal government got its hooks into the radio and was able to control the information that was disseminated therein, right? And so depending on where you were, you had access to maybe one or two radio stations. And so even in that respect, you had access to very limited information. And then along came television. And those of you who are old enough to remember the old analog television sets, you maybe got a handful of channels. You had the controlled narrative that was being pushed in the media. It seemed as if all of the mouthpieces, all of the communicators who were in a public setting, on a public stage, were pushing a narrative that was similar in kind to the narrative being pushed on another platform. That is to say, that the information that you saw being disseminated on a television screen was similar to that which was being pushed in college classrooms and secondary and primary education and the radio and in the newspapers, on and so forth. The information was controlled, and it told you how to perceive a given event. Take, for example, World War II, right? I have yet to put out a video or do a documentary over World War II, but that whole thing is very fascinating to me. Think for a moment how people, when they see a swastika, right? Nazi symbolism. We are trained to look at that symbol as a symbol of hate, as a symbol of bigotry, as a symbol of terror, so on and so forth. Meanwhile, we're not trained, if you went to an American public school, to look at the hammer and sickle with those same feelings, with those same sentiments. People walk around during protests with their fists high in the air, whether they are protesting Gaza or Israel, or whether they are, in and among a Black Lives Matter protest or protesting climate change. You see the symbol of solidarity, that fist in the air, the same symbol that's responsible for, or not responsible, but that is reminiscent of an ideology that is responsible for killing millions of people over the course of the 20th century, right? Communism killed more people than Nazism. That's not to say that Nazism is good. That's not to say that Nazism is okay. But communism is a bigger threat than Nazism. It just is. Nazism, National Socialism versus communism. Worldwide communist imperialism is what we're referring to. And so when it comes to our America's position in World War II, going overseas to fight a German dictator when we had a dictator in our very own White House named FDR, teaming up with another dictator, Joseph Stalin, who was starving his people to death in the Soviet Union. But we don't see, that's not the narrative that we're given. We're given, we had to stop Nazism. Nazism was, they wanted to take over Europe. This is what we're told. And so the information that was being disseminated there in the 1930s and 40s was meant to galvanize the American public opinion to feel a certain way about the war that we were engaged in. Now that we are in the social media age, where everybody and their dog can opine on current events, it's very difficult to realize the historical implications of things that are going on because there's so much noise, right? So, I mean, you can get into an argument as to whether all of the noise and the free access to information and the free access to the public square, you can argue over whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it bodes well for society or bad for society. But one thing I will say is that we've seen centuries of controlled information, and look where that's gotten us. And so at least with this kind of opening of the floodgates where everybody is able to opine and cast and question and criticize and scrutinize and research and all the things. Yes, there are floodgates to be sure. There is a saturation of information to be sure. However, what tends to happen from what I see is is reminiscent of the free market. In other words, those who can say a thing better than another person tend to be the ones who get the numbers in terms of the audience and the clicks and the shares and all the things. And you do see a diversity of opinion that's being disseminated. I mean, you can't go on Instagram or TikTok or IG and not see folks who have a very woke worldview with hundreds of thousands of followers, and in the same vein, see somebody who has a very base worldview have just as many followers and just as many clicks and so on and so forth. And so there is something to say about the fact that the #1 podcast in the world belongs to Joe Rogan, who has some pretty leftist worldviews, but also have some pretty conservative views. But I'm getting off on a tangent here. Back to the matter at hand. So anyway, sorry for being all over the place. The Super Bowl is going on right now, and that's why the rest of the gang is not here. And I have no interest in watching the Super Bowl. I haven't watched a single football game all season long, so I'm not about to sit in front of a television and watch the Super Bowl just because that is something that we Americans do, right? Yeah, that's not something that I'm interested in. But for those of you who are watching, thank you for watching. Thank you for rocking with me. You could be anywhere else in the world right now, but you are here. So I was talking about Trump and his conservative bona fides. And before some of you go off on me and saying, "Oh, you can't talk about Trump. This is, we all have to stick together. We all have, whether you are a rhino or whether you are a staunch radical right-wing conservative, everybody has to just come together and support Trump because this is what we got to do in order to, roll back a lot of the policies that Joe Biden." I'm not on that time, as the kids say. That's not the kind of time that I'm on, right? In the same way and in the same fashion that I criticized Joe Biden and Trump before him and Barack Hussein Obama before him, you have to hold your politicians and your representative officials accountable. I say that while at the same time not being one who believe that my destiny is contingent on who's in office. I'm always going to land on my feet because I'm a man. And I say that not to puff up my own head or to pat myself on the back. I say that because I have an obligation to be a man, as do you. As do you. You are a person who was made in the image of God, who has a mind that has so much creativity and wherewithal. You have limbs, which means that you have the ability to go out and grind. You have the same 24 hours in a day as the next man. It's on you. The future of your household, your family, your health, your longevity, your spirit, your local community, your state, your country depends on you. It just does. We invest so much power into the government, and we think that just because our guy won, okay, whew, that was close. The other guy almost won. Thank God my guy is in. That means we're good for the next 4 years. No, it's on you to live a life of virtue, to live a life of purpose, irrespective of who is in office. But it's important to pay attention to who's in office, because the truth be told, the politics of our society is almost like a thermostat. It controls the temperature in the room, right? And so being civically engaged does, to some degree, help in terms of determining what that temperature is going to be, right? And we can get into arguments over whether your vote really matters. This is not what tonight's about. Tonight is about, are some of the things that Trump is doing that we consider to be an overhaul of our federal government, this kind of deconstruction, if you will, is it good insofar that it's going to lead to something better? Right? We're tearing something down, but what is it that we're building in its place? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for the tearing down of bad government, of the bureaucracy, of the administrative state. I'm all for tearing these things down with wisdom, with shrewdness. I'm all for that. But at the same time, I think it's important to not put some other Marxist thing in its place. And because Trump did it, or because a so-called Republican politician pushed it, that means it's good. Now it's good Marxism. Now I say that, and what I'm thinking of is Scott Turner, who is the new HUD secretary. Now, I don't know if y'all caught what he said, but I'm going to play it here. Now, he's Trump's new HUD secretary, and I want you to listen to these two clips. One of them is from Scott Turner, who's a Texas boy like me, and the other is from Hakeem Jeffries. Now, Scott Turner is a Republican politician. He used to be a state legislator here in Texas, and he also played in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken. But now he's the newly nominated and confirmed HUD secretary. Listen to what he says.
I want you to know that it really honors me to stand before you today, and I'm very humbled to do so. I consider this a great privilege to serve as your new HUD secretary. We have a housing crisis, a housing affordability crisis. We have a homelessness issue. We have disaster recovery. There's a lot of things we've got to deal with this agency, and we will. But I want to challenge everyone in this room and everyone that is watching. We will not just think of these things as crises, but instead opportunities to make a difference in the lives of so many people across this country, an opportunity to lift people up, to lift families up, to lead them to a path of self-sufficiency, an opportunity to impact and to enact impactful, enduring policies that build on the president's day one executive order to reduce housing costs in our country.
I'm going to do everything in my power, says Scott Turner, to help lead families to prosperity and all this other jibber jabber. My question for you, dear chat, what role does the government have in leading families to prosperity? Whatever happened to that spirit that made America great, where Americans realized that if I'm going to be led to prosperity, it's on me. It's on what I can do with these. This kind of enabling rhetoric that, what am I trying to say? That this kind of enabling rhetoric that makes the government relevant and gives the government permission to tax you at the wazoo for its own relevancy does not sound good to these ears, whether it's coming from a Republican administration or a Democrat administration. Folks, the fact that we make so much to do about politics, right? We get bent out of shape and we contort our bodies when it comes time for, election season, right? We pay attention to the primaries, we pay attention to the debates. We're so invested in what's going on in Washington, D.C. We find ourselves on IG and on TikTok and on Twitter and YouTube doing these videos about, can you believe what Trump said? Did you see what Kamala said? And da-da-da, back and forth. You're just watching it like it's a sporting event. We're so invested, right? And again, don't hear me say that it's not important to pay attention to what's going on. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the fact of the matter is that by virtue of the fact that we give all of our attention, all of our being to what's going on politically, we in a sense get intoxicated with this thing, and in our inebriated state, we lose sight of the fact that the longevity of our country depends on us, not Trump. When you're in that inebriated state, you miss things like what Scott Turner just said there. You don't really see through what he's saying there. What he should have said is, I don't believe that the HUD department is even necessary. I think it enables people. Yes, there's a lot of homelessness. Yes, there's a lot of this, there's a lot of that. But the very fact is, organizations and bureaucracies like the HUD department is in some ways responsible for enabling so many people over the past 50 or 60 years, however long this department existed, enabling and hurting more than it's helped. And so I'm going to do everything I can to roll back waste, fraud, and abuse. That should have been his stance. And then I would have been like, okay, that's something I can get behind. When it comes to the closing of the Department of Education, I'm for it. When it comes to the closing of, USAID and some of these other nonsensical, organizations, I'm all for it. But there's so many areas that rather than challenging the status quo, we're just putting somebody else in there who has an R in front of their name in order that they might do the same things the so-called left was doing, only now with a Republican tinge to it. What did Trump say about Social Security? Oh, no, I'm not going to end Social Security. I'm not going to take away your Social Security. Right? The debate became about whether or not immigrants should have access to Social Security and not Social Security should exist in the first place. And that's what our government does. Our government introduces these welfare policies into the American fabric. They get so many people hooked on said welfare policies, so many people dependent on so-called welfare policies. And when they do this, you are inadvertently building an army against cooler heads who will ask the question, well, wait, why do we have these policies to begin with? These are draining the pockets of the American people. This is crazy. And not only is it draining the pockets of the American people, it's also enriching politicians and enriching the administrative state and expanding the role of the federal government. But the American people are happy as a clam because, hey, at least I get my Social Security when I turn 60, whatever. And so you are building an army of dependent Americans who are sure to fight you to keep their Social Security. And so it's this kind of jujitsu move that's difficult to break loose from in order that we might get back to some degree of having a country that is truly about meritocracy and not about socialism. I'm hoping what I'm saying makes sense. So you heard what Scott Turner said. Now let's turn to what Hakeem Jeffries said. Is it Hakeem Jeffries or was it another clip? It might not be the Hakeem Jeffries clip. It might be another one. Bear with me. I'm doing my own producing while I'm live on the show. So there's going to be some mistakes and dead air and things of this nature. But thank y'all for being gracious. Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? Okay, is this it? I think this is it.
Democrats are always ready, willing, and able to driving down the high cost of living. We understand that America is too expensive. There are far too many hardworking American taxpayers struggling to live paycheck to paycheck. Housing costs are too high. Grocery costs are too high. Child care costs are too high. Insurance costs are too high. Utility costs are too high. America is too expensive. Democrats are committed to driving down the high cost of living.
Okay. So do you hear it? Do you hear the similarities between what Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat, is saying and what Scott Turner, a Republican, handpicked by Donald Trump to be the HUD secretary, is saying? America's too expensive to live in. Democrats are committed to lowering the price. Scott Turner, housing is too expensive. The Trump administration is committed to lowering the price. You know the way that you get rid of high prices? It's not by pushing policies and pushing legislation and all this nonsense. No. It's by repealing legislation. It's by repealing red tape and government overreach. That's how you do it. You get the government out of it, because to the extent that the government superimposes itself into a matter, it makes conditions worse. It muddles the water between the two people who are supposed to be involved in the transaction, right? Now that you have this third party, i.e. the government, in between that transaction, that's what drives up the costs. And not only that, let's say that a prospective home buyer or renter does find themselves in search of a house, and they are coming into contact with landlords and those who are trying to sell their homes. And in the private sector, said landlords and home sellers are putting up conditions under which you can buy my house or rent my house and things of this nature. There is a character building component to finding a house. If you are someone who is trying to buy a house, especially if you're trying to rent a house, well, you know, you have to meet X, Y, and Z qualifications if you're going to rent my house, right? That means that, okay, I want to move into this house in this neighborhood. And I talked to this landlord, talked to that landlord, talked to that landlord, and they all seem to have these qualifications, these standards that I must meet in order to move into one of those houses in that neighborhood. What is it about me? What deficiencies do I have, whether it be my income, whether it be whatever the case may be, that is preventing me from getting into that house? Maybe I need to go back and make some changes. See, there's a character building component in it. Whereas if you have Section 8, right? Don't even get me started. But the point that I'm making here, folks, is yes, there's going to be hardship in the event that we do have a genuine small government, a government that's not super intrusive and superimposing itself in every matter. Yes, there's going to be a kind of roughing it component to everyday life. But in that roughing it phase, men are becoming stronger men and women are becoming more virtuous women. And that is a society that is long for this world. But to the extent that you coddle the American people, you put up all of these policies and all these programs that's supposed to pacify us and it's supposed to pamper us, you're making us weaker, you're making us dependent, and weak, dependent people cannot keep a country. They just can't. But you know who's getting stronger? You know who's getting bigger? The federal government, who has a global interest. Who has a global interest. China has a global interest. And they are more ambitious than our own government. You see, China is philosophically driven. American politicians are monetarily driven. This is why they are so easily bought and paid for. They will pull the lever on a certain bill, cast their vote to go a certain way, if that means getting a financial kickback, right? If that means getting to line their own pockets. So they're willing to sell their own souls for the money. They want the money. That's what they want. Whereas the Chinese politicians, they want the power. And so in a scenario where we do finally get to a place where America, China, the G7, all of these other countries are ripe for that move, that next step toward globalism, which country do you believe is going to have the hierarchy in that global society? Certainly isn't Americans. You see, we have this kind of pride because we believe, because we were born in this country, because, you know, it's kind of like cheering for your favorite team. You cheer for your favorite football team or basketball team or whatever, because that's the town that you live in. You probably grew up in that town. And you think very highly of that team. They can go 0-14, but you're still cheering for them. And you still look at all the bright spots in that team. Yeah, you get frustrated when they lose, or whenever somebody makes a bad play or a bad pass or fumbles the ball or whatever the case may be. But you're still cheering for that team because that's your team. You have pride in your team. That's the way a lot of us feel about America. When in reality, our politicians, the people who are supposed to represent this country, are going around making deals that benefit their own personal interests, but do not benefit the country at large. And they are making steps toward globalism, wherein America doesn't hold any kind of hierarchy. They might hold a symbolic hierarchy, but the real power would go to the more ideologically driven countries like China. Again, I'm hoping what I'm saying makes sense. So once again, do I appreciate some of the overhaul that is going on vis-a-vis the Trump administration? I do. I genuinely do. We do need a government audit. And that, from the look of things, is what Trump is doing. But are we really just trading one form of Marxism for another? Are we? Vivek Ramaswamy said he wants to shut down the FBI, right? Kash Patel is on record saying he wants to shut down the FBI. And particularly when it comes to Vivek Ramaswamy, the reason that he gave, and you can go back and watch his interview that he did with the Breakfast Club, and the interview that several interviews that he did, when given reason as to why he believes the FBI should be shut down, an example that he gives, or the example that he gives, is look at what J. Edgar Hoover did. He always goes back to J. Edgar Hoover. He talks about this book that he read called G-Man, which was written by a liberal hack, a professor at Yale, this woman, who wrote the book more so to slander J. Edgar Hoover, not to give a genuine historical account of who J. Edgar Hoover was and what he was trying to do. I genuinely believe that if not for J. Edgar Hoover, this country would have destructed a long time ago. I genuinely believe that. Vivek Ramaswamy is upset that J. Edgar Hoover initiated COINTELPRO, which gathered evidence and material on Martin Luther King Jr., who was just a radical Marxist. That's who Martin Luther King was. And he was using the church subversively to push Marxism. He was using Black folks, particularly Black youth, to push Marxist ideology in America. vis-a-vis Moscow or directives from Moscow, which says, for lack of better explanation, that the way to take a country like America is to do so from within, is to take it from within. And so MLK, along with other individuals and other movements, including the feminist movement and the free love movement and the gay liberation movement and the sexual freedom movement and all these other movements, was meant for the very purpose of imploding America from within. And so the question becomes, since we know Marxist ideology not only exists, but is dead set on destroying Western civilization, just outright destroying Western civilization. I mean, it says so. Oh, that book is in my house, but it says so. I wish I had my copy of the Communist Manifesto, because if you read the Communist Manifesto, it's right there in black and white what this ideology wishes to do, what it aims to do. So you're not dealing with a mere party amongst your political landscape that merely wishes to exist and to push legislation that's just going to make everybody free. No, that's not what communism is. Communism is a deadly ideology, as we've seen once again over the course of the 20th century. And so, in an effort to not allow that to happen in our own country, people like J. Edgar Hoover had to do what was necessary to see what were the plans of the communists in America, and that's how you get COINTELPRO. And Martin Luther King was successful in doing what this agenda is, what this communist agenda is, insofar that he was able to centralize a lot of responsibilities to the federal government. They did this with education. They did this with small businesses. It's all incrementalism. It's all gradualism toward the bigger thing, toward the larger thing. And so the question becomes, does a country have a right to protect against efforts to subversively destroy its framework? Does a country have a right to protect against efforts to destroy its framework? Yes or no? Because the communists, yes, early on that you had people who were in the streets arguing and advocating for the destruction of America and the destruction of Western civilization. But it wasn't long before they decided to go underground and to do so subversively, to infiltrate the church, to infiltrate the schools, to infiltrate the government and the courts. Right? So they took their organization underground and they pretended to be something that they weren't in order to manipulate and to maneuver and to scheme clandestinely to push their ideology, to push their destructive efforts. Because communism is not like the Libertarian Party or this party or that party. I mean, they've infiltrated those parties just like they infiltrated the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, right? They like to chameleonize themselves and to infiltrate things in order to push their efforts and in order to push their agenda. And so it's this kind of greasy, slimy thing that once you get your hands on it, it slips away and then goes and morphs into something else. That's communism. And it used to be that to the extent that you had communists doing all kinds of agitative things in a country, they would be exiled from that country. They'll be kicked out of that country because countries didn't tolerate it back then. But what did America do? We welcomed all of these people. We brought folks over from the, what's the school called? They're in Germany. The Frankfurt School. Brought them over here. Allowed them to set up shop at Columbia University and the University of Chicago. Just brought them on over here. Right? You have, dang, all my books are in the house. Yeah, I have a book called Letters to Americans, right? It's a accumulation of correspondence between Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and American politicians during the 19th century. They were pen pals with Abraham Lincoln, pen pals with Thaddeus Stevens, and I forget the general's name. He was a general in the Union Army, and other individuals who were radical Republican politicians in our Congress, pen pals, who were basically opining on what the Union Army should do and what the North should do in order to make the South pay. A lot of the Reconstruction policies that came from Washington, D.C. after the Civil War were manufactured in some respects by Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx. Not as a means of lifting the Negro up, but as a means of causing destruction to push communism. These are all facts. And again, you can't make sense of what's going on right now, irrespective of who's in office, who's in the White House, without having an understanding of the deep historical roots of what went on yesterday. So let us move on. Let's take a look at what Elizabeth Warren has to say. Where are you at, Elizabeth?
Stop what you're doing. President Trump broke the law and shut down a huge chunk of government funding. That means little kids in preschool may stop getting their school lunches. Meals on Wheels, the folks bringing hot food to seniors could grind to a halt. Nursing homes funded by Medicaid don't know how to pay their workers. Whether you live in a red state or a blue state, this is a lot of pain on a lot of people, and that is just the start. If you're working to cure cancer, your funding was just paused. If you run a homeless shelter, your budget now has a big hole in it. How do you feed people? If you work at a veterans nonprofit, you're scrambling to get answers. Donald Trump promised to bring down the cost of living for working people on day one. Well, here we are at the start of week 2, and he's ripping away the programs that help people breathe a little easier. We gotta fight back.
We gotta fight back, she says. We gotta fight back. So again, I mean, where do I even start with Elizabeth Warren? Donald Trump is taking away Medicaid and Medicare. He's taking away this funding and taking away that funding. If you are an American and you rely on these things, then you should be worried. You should stop what you're doing. Remember what I said earlier? What is the objective? Get as many people hooked on government as possible. And in so doing, you'll inadvertently create an army against cooler heads who come along and say, we don't need this stuff. This stuff is bleeding our country. It's bleeding our country out. And what happens when you lose too much blood? You cease to exist. You die. That's what happens when you bleed out. We're bleeding. I am a business owner, and I have to pay taxes quarterly. And I just let my administrator handle that. I don't even want to, I mean, I should look at it. I mean, that's what a responsible business owner would do. But it's like just watching the money go away to the government, who did all of nothing, literally zero, to help bring in the business, to help bring in my customers, to help establish and solidify the company as a reputable company. We do very little advertising. We don't do any advertising, actually. All of our work comes from word of mouth. That's hard work that did that. The government didn't do anything, but yet I'm having to pay them quarterly. Now, I understand. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. Because that's an instruction from the one I call Lord, the one I call Master over me, Jesus Christ. I'm going to obey that. But in a constitutional republic where we get the opportunity to vote for who our representatives would be, And in so doing, we're voting for how the money will be spent and how it will be distributed and how it will be and what programs it should fund versus what it should get rid of. We do have some say, right? And what Caesar does with the money. We do have some say in what Caesar does with the money. And I understand not everybody thinks like me, right? There's a lot of Americans, both Republican and Democrat, who believe that these programs should exist. You heard Scott Turner up there earlier, the HUD secretary. From what it sounds like, he has no intentions on rolling back government spending. And again, I'm going off of a little snippet of what he said. He might actually have intentions of rolling back. I don't know. I don't know him. But from that snippet, seems to me that you're going to do the same thing the Democrats do. Or you're at least starting from the same philosophical posture as the Democrats, as the liberals, insofar that you believe that it's the government's responsibility or the government has a role in leading families to prosperity and lowering the cost of living, not by rolling back policies and rolling back regulation and red tape, but by pushing more policies, legislation, and red tape. Let's go ahead and play that one more time. Sorry to be redundant, but I have to.
I want you to know that it really honors me to stand before you today, and I'm very humbled to do so. I consider this a great privilege to serve as your new HUD secretary. We have a housing crisis, a housing affordability crisis. We have a homelessness issue. We have disaster recovery. There's a lot of things we've got to deal with this agency, and we will. But I want to challenge everyone in this room and everyone that is watching. We will not just think of these things as crisis, but instead opportunities to make a difference in the lives of so many people across this country, an opportunity to lift people up, to lift families up, to lead them to a path of self-sufficiency, an opportunity to impact and to enact impactful, enduring policies that.
I mean, you heard him, right? And don't get, don't get caught, carried away by, well, he did say lead to self-sufficiency. You think the government has an interest in leading you to self-sufficiency? If you do, I have a bridge to sell you. But this notion that the government has within it this ability to lead people to self-sufficiency it's ludicrous. That's on you. And here's the thing: if you are somebody who can be led to self-sufficiency, you're going to, if you're somebody who is going to eventually be self-sufficient, you're going to do that regardless of whether the government helps you or not. You're going to do that whether the government helps you or not. And so you can't look at the government policies and the government programs and say, well, we need these because there's people who benefit. No, the people who benefited in terms of being able to start their business or being able to get to a place where they found a good job and they are now stable, they would have gotten into that place regardless of whether the government helped them or not. And in fact, without that government help, when they finally arrived at a place of self-sufficiency, they'd be stronger. They'd have stronger character because they really did get it out the mud, so to speak. I mean, I know what I'm saying is harsh, and it's hard for some people to believe or to agree with. But you're looking at somebody who genuinely, like I don't tell a lot of people this, but I used to be homeless. Like right after high school. It was only for about 7 or 8 months, but I was literally sleeping in my car. And to go from sleeping in my car to being able to start my own business within a matter of 5 or 7 years without any welfare or unemployment or anything of that nature, it can be done. I'm not an anomaly. I'm not special. I simply applied the mind that God has given me, the same one that he gave you. I use the same limbs that God has given me to do, the same limbs that he gave you. I use the same 24 hours in a day, the same 24 hours that he gives you to get to a place of self-sufficiency. To the extent, once again, that you give all these programs and pass all these policies. You heard Scott Turner just say it. Policies is what he gives credit to lift people up out of poverty and to, lead families to self-sufficiency. Policies is what he is interested in. I can tell you one thing. The data shows that those policies are more abused than they are used for what their so-called intended purposes are. And I would argue that what you think are the intended purposes are not actually intended. See Cloward-Piven. The Cloward-Piven strategy is, after all, the basis on which the HUD was built upon. Let us move on.
Elon Musk is a Nazi nepo-baby. A godless, lawless billionaire. You know what elected Elon? This is the American people. This is not your trashy Cybertruck. But you can just dismantle, pick apart, and sell the pieces of. There's a sign back there that says Doge actually means dangerous oligarchs grab everything. Well, ain't that the truth? I am so tired of these billionaire boys and their grubby little hands grabbing at everything. Hands off our bodies. Hands off our data. Hands off our tax refunds. Hands off our social security checks. Hands off our competition. Hands off our democracy.
Now, imagine. So let me give you a little picture here. So one of my employees, because I own a plumbing company, right? One of my employees had on his van, his work van, a sewer camera that belonged to the company. Now, those of you who know anything about plumbing or know anything about sewer cameras, these things are cool, right? You have this sewer camera, and let's say that you're having constant blockages in your sewer piping, and when that happens, you get dirty water that comes up inside of your shower. Your toilets won't flush, your sinks won't drain. It's just a mess, right? And then you have a plumber come out and they snake your sewer main, get you back up and running, and then within 2 months it happens again, and it just keeps happening, right? So if something like this keeps happening, a plumber would say, okay, we need to inspect your sewer line to see what's causing this repeat issue. So you take this camera, you put it down what's called a clean out. Everybody has a clean out in your yard unless it was buried or something like that. So you open up the clean out, you put the camera head inside of the clean out, and then you are able to run that camera reel down the pipeline, and you're able to look inside the pipe and see and investigate what's causing this issue. And more often than not, it's some kind of break, maybe some roots got into your sewer line, or what, a whole number of things. And then you have this device, it's called a locator, and you're able to take, so let's say that I run my camera head down your sewer line, and I keep going and keep going and keep going, and about 75 feet into your line, I see what the issue is. Well, what I do is I leave that cable inside of your sewer line, and then I take my locator and I trace your yard until I find the signal that puts me right on top of where that camera head is. And not only does it lead me right to where the issue is, on the screen, it shows me how deep the pipe is. And so if I'm right on top of the pipe, I can look at that screen and, oh, here's where the issue is, and it's 5 feet deep. I can see from this image that there's a break in the line, and that's what's causing, and because of that break, roots are able to get into the line, and that's what's causing this you to have these frequent issues. And so then we can have plumbers come out, dig up your yard or dig up that spot in your yard, fix it, and you're back up and going. This camera costs around $12,000, right? And so one of my workers, one of my guys, was on a job, and he left his van unlocked. Somebody broke into that van and took that $12,000 camera, along with some other high-dollar tools. This was about 4 or 5 years ago when that happened, right? Now, we never did recover the camera. The camera's long gone. Now, imagine if I, instead of that camera, because that camera was a Rigid camera, a brand called Rigid. There's another camera that's made by a company called Milwaukee. And that Milwaukee camera has what's called a 1 key on there. And that 1 key has a tracking device. And if somebody did take that camera, I'm able to track exactly where it is. Now, all of the tools that our company have now are Milwaukee tools with that 1 key on there, because we got hit so many times. Now, imagine if I was able to track down the camera and say, hey, that's my camera. I'm going to confiscate it. I'm going to take it back from you. And imagine if the guy who stole the camera said, no, that's my camera. Hands off my camera. He didn't pay any money for it. He just simply stole it. He hijacked it, right? Something that I worked hard for, something that I invested in for my company was stolen. And imagine, once again, if I found the guy who took it and I took it back from him and he went to hooping and hollering and raising hell because I'm taking something that belongs to me. And he's calling me grabby hands and hands off of my camera, hands off of my tools, knowing good and damn well that he took those from me, that he hijacked those from me. That is exactly what was going on with that in that clip with Ayanna Presley, or whatever her name is. Notice she said, hands off of our Constitution. Now, there's a whole story about how Marxists hijacked the Constitution. And we're going to be telling that story in a documentary that I'm coming out in April called The MLK Project, where he was able to co-opt the language of the Constitution to push a Marxist ideology, thereby ushering in an America 2.0 that is so foreign from the original Constitution that led so many to freedom and liberty and prosperity. And I know what some of y'all are thinking. Well, isn't it true that Martin Luther King brought the racists together and brought about? No, he didn't. He did not. That's not a thing that happened in real life. As I said in a reel that I posted on IG like 2 or 3 weeks ago, what Martin Luther King did is gave you the facade of improved race relations. It's not improved. It's not improved at all. You mean to tell me that an example of improved race relations is white people walking on eggshells around black people for fear as to not to offend them or say the wrong thing? That's improved? Or black people who feel as if they're entitled, who wish a Peckerwood would, who wish a white person would say something, who wish they would say the N-word. They're going to go crazy, start acting like a monkey. That's improved race relations? Demanding that we get DEI, demanding that we teach CRT in schools, demanding and insisting upon Black history, demanding that you acknowledge Black History Month and acknowledge Martin Luther King Day. Demanding. That's improved race relations? We show evidence in our film on how blacks and whites were genuinely coming together without the marching, without the activism, without the nonsense, were by their own merit coming together and repealing Jim Crow laws where they existed at the private and local level. This was happening. It was happening gradually and incrementally from the 1890s up to 1954, before the Brown v. Board of Education and before the popularization of Martin Luther King Jr. This was already happening. What MLK was able to do under the behest of Stanley Levison, Bayard Rustin, Clarence B. Jones, Ella Baker, and other communists was basically hijack what was already happening in terms of the repealing of Jim Crow laws, make it appear as if Martin Luther King was responsible for this wholesale getting rid of Jim Crow, only serving to expand the role of the federal government, pass legislation with language in there that goes after bigots and racists and all this other nonsense, and thereby having you believe that Martin Luther King is responsible for bringing the racists together. When in reality, if not for the civil rights movement, if not for Martin Luther King Jr., what was already happening before him would have continued happening to a point where Jim Crow laws would have been completely just gone by the 1970s, or maybe the 80s, depending on which area you're talking about. And even then, they would have been so out of vogue that they would have just disappeared or been repealed, either publicly or quietly. Either way, you wouldn't have had what ended up happening, which is the shifting of the Black mindset. The Black mindset shifted as a result of the civil rights movement and the subsequent Black militant movement, where the spirit of entitlement was instilled in Black culture. And as a result of this indulgence culture, the Black community took a turn for the worse. You went from 3 out of 4 children, Black children, growing up in a 2-parent household to a point now where 70+% of Black children are growing up in single mother households, where many Black children can't read or do math at grade level. You have all these disparities and gaps and all these other issues that are not the result of systemic racism, but are the result of a disgusting, destructive culture. That's the result of the civil rights movement. It just is what it is, right? But one of the things that Martin Luther King did during the I Have a Dream speech was invoke the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, talking about living out the true nature, the true of our credence, that all men are created equal. Basically, again, invoking the language of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, giving off the impression that he's representing the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, when in reality, no, he's co-opting the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And there are many people who believe that Martin Luther King is the founding father of America 2.0. And unfortunately, they're right. This new version of America, it's sick, it's disgusting, it's unrecognizable, where the race relations are basically chalked up to white people walking on eggshells and Black people feeling entitled. That's not improved race relations. Now, I understand that many of us do have genuine friendships with other people of other races. Guess what? That existed before Martin Luther King. It did. But we could really do without this strange dynamic between the eggshells and the entitlement. We can do without that. We really can. And it's interesting when you go back and you listen to, I mean, it's happening right now as we speak. You heard some of it last week on Cutting Through the Culture, the show that I had to miss, where proponents of DEI are crediting Martin Luther King to give credence to the existence of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And on the other side, you have foolish Republicans who say, no, well, yeah, Martin Luther King wanted a colorblind society. Anyway, so what Ayanna Pressley is doing in that little speech that she gave, when she says, hands off our Constitution, hands off this, that, and the other, to the extent that she's invoking the Constitution, she's invoking a hijacked version of the Constitution, something that was stolen and rebranded, and repackaged, and then redistributed. That's what she's referring to. And to the extent that Donald Trump, I don't know if he wants to do this, but let's say he does, to the extent that Donald Trump wants to get back to the true meaning of the Constitution, people like Ayanna Pressley is accusing him of being a thief, of stealing it. But there were other things in her little speech that she said hands off of. She talked about hands off of our Medicare, hands off of our Social Security. That's very rich coming from her, coming from a Marxist such as her, right? Because in order for others to put hands on your Social Security, you put hands on our tax dollars in order to fund this Social Security. So in the same way that you're telling Trump, hands off your Social Security, how about you take your hands off of my tax dollars, which is funding Social Security? How about that? Oh, but you don't want to talk about that, do you? Let us move on.
Excuse me?
Are you prepared to stand here all night if we decide to stay?
I guess, yeah.
All right, well, you just stay right there then. And you just stay and stand.
Why are you letting us go to that desk like we were able to do last year?
He's not a U.S. employee.
This is a public institution. Did Elon Musk hire you? Who do you work for? Who do you work for? Are you not aware of? Are you even? Who do you work for?
I'm a federal employee working for the education.
Who do you work for? Are you even qualified to be here? Are you a federal employee? Why won't you let us in and go to the desk like we did last year? Right? You have all these Congress people standing there. You have this one lone man blocking the entrance saying, you shall not pass. And these distraught, and again, it's theatrics. It's all theatrics. Because again, if they wanted to get in, they'd be able to get in, right? But they wanted to stand there and show face and show their constituents that they're fighting against Trump, that they're resisting and all this other nonsense. When the reality of it is, under Doge, there is a full sweep audit going on to see what is the Department of the Treasury spending money on. What is the Department of Education spending money on? What is this department and that department and that department and this department spending money on? The American people need to see the receipts to see where our money is going, which again, I commend. I'm here for it. I am totally here for it. But folks, y'all really need to put pressure on the Trump administration as it relates to HUD, as it relates to all these other departments, and see to it that they're not putting in its place, once the deconstruction goes on and is carried out, to make sure that we don't put in its place some Republican version of Marxism, because Republican Marxism exists in the same way that Democrat Marxism exists. I hate to keep banging on that dead horse, but it needs to be said. It really does. All right, so let's get to some of your supers. I'm over here yapping away. Thank you. Let's see here. Spar Smoke for the super sticker. Really appreciate it. Left another one, $2. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Cruise Missile, $5. Really appreciate the super sticker. Thank y'all for coming here on this Sunday night and hanging out with me. Let's see. Martian Coon, $10. Says Trump in past interviews has views that are in line with modern and old conservatives. Trump found out the hard way first time that the bureaucracy is entrenched and is taking the sapper approach to DC. Sorry for my stumbling and bumbling over that. This yellow is kind of throwing me off. Thank you for that. Super. Really appreciate it. As far as Trump having conservative views and past interviews, I don't know. What is your definition, Martian Kuhn, if you're still here, of conservatism? What is an example of something that Trump said in the past that you think is representative of a conservative worldview? That's a genuine question. It's not a setup question. I'm genuinely asking. Please enlighten me. Willie Doc, $5 says, appreciate you, Chad, listening to you with the Super Bowl in the background. I just recently shared with a minister to reconsider MLK based on your show. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And that green is a lot better. I can read a lot more flawlessly with the green as opposed to the yellow. Will, $5 says, hey, Chad, thanks for streaming tonight. Here's some reparations for your time. Thanks for exercising the courage to speak the truth. Thank you, Will. Greatly appreciated. Got another one from Chris Creative. $5 says, have you addressed the Black National Anthem yet? The Black National Anthem, that was written by James Weldon Johnson, no? Of the NAACP. He was a hack as well. No, I haven't addressed it. I'll get into that some in the near, not too near future, or not too late future. I think that's something worth delving into. So thank you for giving me an idea. Martian Kuhn, MLK invoking the Constitution is marrying truth to a lie. 100%. That's the comment of the month, actually. That is the comment of the month. Thank you, Martian Kuhn, for the comment of the month. MLK invoking the Constitution is marrying truth to a lie. Ain't that the truth? I couldn't have said it better myself. Gregatron says, get him, Chad. Tell him the truth. Truth, TROOF. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Got another one from Martin Towns. $5 super sticker. Thank you. Rick Hamstead, $20. Always a great show, Chad O. Jackson. The movie trailer looks epic. God loves you all. Thank you. God loves you too. And then our last one, the Scrapping Beauty, $10. Thank you for having discernment and being forthright with it. Thank you. Is that like a yellow or orange? Just like a orange yellow color. I like that one better. So let us move on. Do I have any more clips? Oh yeah, let's play the British guy. Let's play the British guy. And I want y'all to watch how this starts and then watch how it ends. I want y'all to watch how this starts and then watch how it ends. Where'd it go? Where'd the British dude go? Where did the British dude go? Where did he go? Where did he go? Elizabeth Warren, Scott Turner, Stop the Steal, Hakeem Jeffries. Okay, here we go. Here we go.
You're not really into politics. Okay, it's fair enough. But what are you into? Transformers? Pokemon? You child? Sorry, but this election affects you in ways you couldn't possibly imagine. But also in quite a few ways that even your pot-addled teenage brain can manage. Yeah, soaring youth unemployment in a job market saturated with unpaid internships, filled with jammy little who have daddy helping with the rent. Tuition fees have tripled. No help with housing if you're under 21. Huge cuts to youth services and youth mental health services. Brilliant.
So where did he start with that little, again, very ironic, right? He's accusing his viewer of being a child, yet you are ranting like a child. It's neither here nor there. I guess you can say that I was ranting like a child earlier too, but you know, it's easy to see other people's faults than it is to see my own sometimes. But anyway, the whole notion of calling out apoliticism, I get it. I've done that in the past. Called out apoliticism. People who say, well, you know, politics, I don't have time for politics. I don't pay attention to politics, right? I don't do politics. Well, if you don't do politics, politics is certainly going to do you. Remember the mask mandates? Remember certain states and companies forcing vaccines. If you don't do politics, politics will definitely do you. So I agree with that 100%. But there is a line. There is a line, right? One must not become so entrenched and invested in politics that one feels as if this, like the government getting it just right, means that I can live a long, happy life. The government getting it just right means that I can now do my part, means that I can now enjoy life. That's a line too far. That's a step too far. If that's your way of thinking. Really, if you believe truly in the American idea, really, truly, if you believe in what the Bible says, quite frankly, if you believe in some degree of common sense, then your approach with politics, your relationship with politics, would be that of a watchful eye to see to it that we are not enabling and empowering our government to revoke our liberty, to push policies in the name of social justice, in the name of liberty, that actually has the adverse effect, that has a true effect of impeding and taking away our rights, taking away our liberty, and making us ever dependent on them. So if you are going to be a grown man about it, you should have a watchful eye of politics. You should be invested in politics to the extent that your role is to help keep the government small. That should be the relationship you have with politics. But as this British dude goes on, he's talking about soaring unemployment and youth services and this, that, and the other. Everything that he's naming as a reason why you should be involved in politics are things that can and should be done at the private level. And to the extent that the government does get involved, I believe at the maximum it should be at the local level. Never, ever, ever should it rise as high as the state level or the federal government. Soaring unemployment. That sounds like Marxism to me. Why would you vest the responsibility of employment versus unemployment into the federal government? Like, why would you do that? That's playing right into the Marxist playbook that advocates for centralization of control of goods and services belonging to the state. That's what Marx advocated for. The government owning the means of production. Unemployment and employment belongs at the private level, in the private sector. It just does. I know some of y'all are not going to like that I said that, because, well, what about, treating employees unfairly, and what about this and what about that? Well, there's a lot of jobs out there. There just is. There just is. I'm not an economist at all, but I know enough to understand that the economy can be broken down to a very basic and simple matter that focuses on two things: a man's need to survive and a man's desires for what he wants. A man's need to survive and a man's desires for what he wants. That's the economy. That's the economy. Well, what about selfishness? Well, the thing about selfishness is that when one participates in the economy, even if they're doing so with a selfish or from a selfish posture, they are inadvertently feeding other people by the spending of their dollars. Because the spending of their dollars means other people being employed. And those people who are employed getting the money needed to take care of themselves and take care of their family. So whether a person is engaging in the marketplace from a selfish posture or from a philanthropic posture, the result is the same in terms of people being employed in this kind of circular way, and this kind of ecosystem of the spending and the transactions and of money, of the market taking care of itself. Well, what about, once again, this question is always going to come up, and that's why I'm repeating it. What about, people being mistreated and things of this nature? Well, you have the ability, you have the freedom to quit that employer who you don't believe is treating you friendly or treating you nicely, and go work for someone else or go and start your own business. That's your right. This is a free country. You have the ability to do that. It's becoming less of a free country, but to the extent that we have some freedom left, that's your ability to do that. These excuses, once again, you're talking to somebody who literally came up from nothing to now being able to own a plumbing company that's successful, and who is now starting a film company that is proving to be successful so far. In terms of my ability to make scenes that convey the story that I want to tell, in order to get other people to buy into this telling of the story at the grassroots level, in terms of raising the money to get the film done. It can be done. What are you interested in? What can you provide that will be useful to the marketplace? I'm telling you this not to break you down or to chew you out. I'm telling you this as a means of edification. God has given you a mind. He's giving you limbs. He's giving you hours in a day. He's giving you air to breathe. He did this because he loves you and he cares for you. And it's a slap in the face when you don't put those things to good use, for the taking care of yourself, the taking care of your family, and the prosperity of your community around you. You don't need the government to implement programs and policies that do for you what you should be doing for yourself. And so when it comes to the first part of what he's saying, in terms of your need to be engaged or at least aware of what's going on politically, I agree with. But this notion that you should do so for the sake of having programs and policies in place that help with unemployment and housing and all this other stuff that should be left up to you at the individual level, I totally reject. So again, you saw several Democrats actually, Hakeem Jeffries and Elizabeth Warren and others, Ayanna Pressley, advocating for the longevity of programs and policies. You saw a Republican representative of Trump's administration. And now you see this British dude, a sea across, all saying the same thing, that we need policies, we need programs for the sake of our comfort and our freedom and our longevity. It's all nonsense. I'm here to tell you that God has given you the means to be productive. Now go be productive. Don't let your hand off the plow. Because the government sure as hell don't know how to plow. And if you're not doing the plowing, the government's not doing the plowing is not going to get done. And the field is going to be overgrown with thistles and thorns and be uninhabitable. And then everybody's going to die. I'm sure that analogy breaks down somewhere, but take it for what it's worth. The last thing that I will leave you all with is something that I have a funny feeling about. I have a funny feeling about this one here. I'm going to play it for you, and I'm going to see if you all catch it as well. Check this out. This is Hakeem Jeffries.
We will introduce the Stop the Steal Act in short order to prevent unlawful access with respect to the Department of Treasury's payment system connected to people who are trying to steal personal, sensitive, and confidential information related to Social Security recipients, Medicare recipients, taxpayers, businesses, non-for-profits, veterans, and everyday Americans. It's unacceptable, unconscionable, and un-American. Stop the Steal Act will prevent this unlawful access from taking place.
Okay, so allow me to try to break this down for you, if I may. In 2020, leading to November, we had an international crisis at hand. There were a lot of countries, including our own, who had these vast lockdown policies in place. Everybody was walking around with masks, and there was social distancing, and there was an election at hand. There were memos and memorandum and plans going into place to try to get as many people to vote as possible. One of those things included vote by mail. The idea being that, well, because COVID is so deadly and we don't want people getting sick due to mass gathering, it's probably best that you vote by mail. This created the opportunity for mischief, and that opportunity was certainly seized upon. November came around, and it was looking good for Trump early on. But there were certain counties, which you can call swing counties, some of which weren't swing counties. Many of these were counties that Trump won in 2016. And his 3.5 years as being president before COVID hit were wildly successful. If you are grading it based upon certain metrics. I had my criticism of Trump even back then, but I mean, I'll tell you what those are briefly. I didn't care for the opportunity zones. I didn't care for a number of things that Trump was doing. I didn't care for the omnibus bill, which was up until that point, the largest spending bill in American history. I didn't care for the fact that he, anyway, on and on I can go. I'm not going to re-air those grievances. But by many metrics, Trump was a very successful president. He got 10 million more votes. I think it was 10 million. Don't quote me on that. But I think it was about 10 million more votes in 2020 than he got in 2016. Which is, I mean, any president who gets 10 million more votes during their second run, I mean, it's no question that they're going to win. But this election was different. The circumstances were different. What was going on in the world and in the country was different in terms of the way that the voting night went, in terms of how you could vote. You had this onslaught, this influx of all these mail-in ballots that came in. And it smacked of irregularities. There was just something off. It was interesting that all of the major media companies, almost at the drop of a hat, came together and on their respective channels were saying this election was not stolen. Nope, it wasn't stolen. Nothing to see here. You had Fox News saying it wasn't stolen that night. CBS, NBC, ABC, all of them were saying, no, this is a fair election. This is a fair election. They were trying to dispel suspicions that there was funny business going on that night. I don't know if you all remember this. I'm going to rehash this because I think I think it's important, right? So after election night, when it was declared that Joseph Robinette Biden was the victor, half the country didn't agree. Half the country believed that the election was stolen. And immediately, persons got to work to challenge the results of the election. And the slogan, "Stop the Steal," was the order of the day. Stop the steal. By the time the tallies came in and their completion, it was said that Joseph Robinette Biden had 81 million votes. A guy who campaigned from his basement, who barely did any rallies, and to the extent that he did a rally, they were like drive-through rallies. I think people were still in their cars, and in order to in lieu of applauding by way of hand claps, they would honk their horns, and you barely heard any honking of horns whenever he would say something that was supposed to be a zinger. Just very odd time, just extremely odd. That guy got 81 million votes, and the pundits who said, well, the reason why he got so many votes is because people hated Trump so much. Well, if they hated Trump so much, how did Trump get 10 million more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016? The math isn't mathing. Anyway, that's what we were made to believe. We weren't made to believe that, but that's what the pundits, that's the spin that they were pushing. Some of these cases made it to certain courts. Many of them did not. They were thrown out. They were dismissed. And fools look to that and say, see, not even the courts were willing to entertain this notion that the election was stolen. The courts are next to God, says these people. These are people who are, who are very learned when it comes to the law, when it comes to, being fair and balanced. Are they? Are they? Because I'll have you know that many of these people were Obama appointees. We're not going to talk about that part, though, are we? And to the extent that you had others who refused to take the cases, they didn't want to get embroiled in what was a political fight of historic proportions. And so it was out of cowardice that many of these judges didn't take on the cases. So they just let the election get stolen. So once again, Stop the Steal was the order of the day. And on January 6th, 2021, when it came time to solidify the election, people showed up to Washington, D.C. Because they felt that it was the last-ditch effort to stop the country from being taken over, to stop an election from being stolen by these oligarchs who were circumventing the electoral process, and who somehow were able to use the camouflage of a pandemic to underhandedly pull this thing off, and who somehow were able to get all of the legacy media companies on board, who were able to get all of the courts on board, and seeing to it that Joseph Robinette Biden would be the one with one hand raised high and the other hand on the Bible, taking the oath of office on January 20th, 2021. Stop the steal. Then the election 2024 came around, and Trump won handsomely. All of the counties that he won in 2016. counties that I believe he won truly in 2020. That election in 2024, which again, you didn't have the pandemic to hide behind. You didn't have all of these other circumstances going for you. So it was much more difficult to steal the election in 2024 than it was in 2020. What 2024 proved is that those who were hollering "Stop the Steal" in 2020 were right. They were right. The election was in fact stolen. And so in order to try to erase that moment in history where an election was stolen, where those who were saying "Stop the Steal" were absolutely right in their belief that the election was in fact stolen, here you now have Democrats introducing legislation called the Stop the Steal Act, which has to do with what? Donald Trump and Elon Musk and others who work for Doge going in and seeing, basically conducting an audit, seeing how our tax dollars are being spent. And so they're co-opting the language of "Stop the Steal," making it or attaching it to something else so as to push a different agenda, so as to draw a different narrative. The Stop the Steal Act, says Hakeem Jeffries, instilling in the minds of the American people that "Stop the Steal" is about Trump trying to steal people's data, steal people's information in order to take away programs and policies that the American people rely upon. So you see how the game is being played. You see how the butter, right, is being churned. Let's play that one more time.
We will introduce the Stop the Steal Act in short order to prevent unlawful access with respect to the Department of Treasury's payment system connected to people who are trying to steal personal, sensitive, and confidential information related to Social Security recipients, Medicare recipients, taxpayers, businesses, non-for-profits, veterans, and everyday Americans. It's unacceptable, unconscionable, and un-American. Stop the Steal Act will prevent this unlawful access from taking place.
So this is politics in 21st century America. This is how the game is played, folks. And so when it comes to apoliticism, when it comes to this notion that I'm disinterested in politics, I don't care about any of that. To the extent that that's your MO, to the extent that that's your position, to the extent that that's your posture, you are, or you're likely to become an unbiased consumer of misinformation. When you hear things in passing, when you hear it enough, you're inclined to believe that it's true because you don't know enough to know the difference between a lie and the truth. The reason why it was necessary for me to basically rehash history from 2016 to 2024 as it relates to the election being stolen in order to kind of build up to the clip you just saw about this Stop the Steal Act was to show you how this language is being subverted, how it's being co-opted to put forth a different image. It's to that extent that you need to at least be aware of what's going on politically so you're not being played. So anyway, I'm hoping that makes sense, folks. I am going to call it a night. Let's see here. Did we get any more supers? I think we did. The Scrapping Beauty, thank you for having this. Okay, I read that one. Thank you, Scrapping Beauty. Really appreciate it. Alethea 846 left a super sticker. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And then we got one from Kyle Huggett. Says, thank you for the show. We have muted the Super Bowl to listen. Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I really do. I really do. I got about 384 people in here across X and YouTube. So that's good. So anyway, I'm glad to have done this show tonight. I really like spending time with you all. I've been working relentlessly on this film, trying to get it done. We're still on track to get it done by April. If you want to help contribute to the movie, to the documentary, feel free to click on the link that's in the description of this live stream on YouTube. It's not on, I don't believe it's on any of the other things that we're streaming on right now. But if you go to the YouTube version of this stream that's going on right now, in the description, there is a link to contribute to our efforts. In due time, I'm going to be closing down that fundraising account, and I'm going to be opening up a general fund account for those who would like to fund future projects. And I have a lot of projects up my sleeve that I'm excited to get into. Again, my plan is to eventually close my plumbing company. I hope to do that by 2027 and focus full-time on filmmaking. And so I'm excited about that. I want to make projects. I want to make films that people feel comfortable showing to their kids, especially for homeschool mothers. I have a special place in my heart for homeschool mothers, for homeschool families. I believe that homeschool families are rearing the children who are going to be the future moral compass of our country. Because right now, when it comes to public school, they are hell-bent on indoctrinating our kids with a secular, atheistic worldview, an activist, climate change worldview. That's just what it is. But shouts out to parents of public school students who are counteracting the propaganda that they're getting from their schools with the truth. And so these films are going to be for you as well. These films are going to be for any educator who wishes to glean from the information that we're putting out in these films, who, even if you can't take these films to your classroom, you can at least go back and research the points that we're making, fact check the points that we're making, that you might be then well-rounded to go before your class and dispel the lies and put forth the truth. These films are for you. We are going to be covering a whole range of topics. We're going to be talking about the truth of the FDR administration. We're going to talk about the truth of gay liberation, which later became the LGBT movement. We're going to talk about the agenda to go against family formation in the United States and around the world. We're going to be looking at other topics like climate change. We're going to be looking at the history of the Renaissance era, the history of the Harlem Renaissance era. We're going to be looking at the Enlightenment era. Just a whole, like, again, the company is called Historia Revelata, which is Latin for history revealed. And yeah, we're going to be looking at both history of old and real-time history, things that are happening right now, and talking about those things from a Christian worldview, a Protestant Christian worldview. And we're going to do so with hopes of, once again, getting the truth out there, lest you be played by demagoguery that is hell-bent on turning you away from Christ and turning you instead toward a building of a Tower of Babel in the modern age. Because that's what our textbooks, I had up here earlier a stack of textbooks from when I was in high school, and people give me textbooks all the time. That's being, I mean, many schools don't use textbooks anymore. A lot of it's digitized now, and kids are given iPads and laptops these days. But to the extent that textbooks still exist, people are always sending them to me. And when I read those things cover to cover, it's very clear what's going on. the whole idea is to put forth a narrative that paints this idea that I should be, in my own way, an activist to move toward a future that's predicated on this false history, or this history that is laden with half truths, and that sings the praises of Marxist activists, although these history books don't call them Marxist activists. That is, in fact, who they were when you're referring to people like Cesar Chavez, when you refer to people like Barack Obama, Martin Luther King, Helen Keller, on and on I can go. It's interesting that many of these textbooks, whether they be in so-called conservative school districts or liberal school districts, all seem to sing the praises of Marxist figures in history, thereby giving students this impression, this notion that the people to look up to, the people to admire, the people to glean from are Marxists. And when that happens, as you come of age, you are more likely to vote for people, to follow people, to give validity to people who are using that same kind of Marxist rhetoric, that same kind of Marxist terminology. And so to the extent that my company, Historia Revelata, or other companies, be they PragerU or Hillsdale or some of the others, to the extent that these resources exist, my hope is that people will begin to deconstruct these myths and this false ideology in pursuit of the one true word, which is the Holy Bible. Because the point of the history that we reveal is not that you might become a conservative activist, or not that you might become, not that you might be used by some other political party, but rather that you might see the nature of man and be less inclined to follow hollow and deceptive philosophies, and be more inclined instead to follow the most perfect man who ever lived, Jesus Christ. So with that being said, I am going to call it a night. I will not go and watch the Super Bowl. I will likely go and catch up on some work-related items, and then take a shower and head to bed. So I love you all. Thank you all for watching tonight. God bless you.